What's up, folks? Today's going to be a straight and to the point video about what is DevPods in contrast to HomeTeam. And some of y'all have followed me for a lot of years. I had a former member of HomeTeam reach out to me with just a straightforward question. I've been talking about in these contexts of other things like the discussion with Tim for the 10-year interview, discussing it like these other videos, explaining different ideas. Let's just break down what and why did we do the pivot to the shape of DevPods. It's not actually that tricky to explain. So HomeTeam, one of the things that happened, right? We've been doing this process since October 2015 and released 220 games, but along the way, I kept adding more features because in my mind, more seemed like better. So we brought in professional support trainers from industry people could schedule calls with. That was included in the pricing, right? We included all kinds of additional materials, included all kinds of additional services and events and activities and a monthly industry interview and all kinds of other stuff. And somewhere along the way, while those additions helped the experienced people who were already in there, what I realized is it had two other effects. It was making it much more confusing for people outside of it as to what's this for, what's it about, which piece should I be focused on here. The other downside is that for people who were not maybe as interested in leveraging all those benefits, they didn't want to schedule calls with industry trainers. Maybe they're not trying to get a job. They just kind of find it fun to make games. They didn't actually want to use some of our materials. They have their own, they feel fine with the stuff they can find on the internet or courses they bought or whatever else. Maybe they don't actually care to attend those monthly industry talks because, again, maybe they're not industry focused. What I realized, we had a lot of members who were joining, but just felt like they were paying for benefits they weren't using. And that the fundamental shift to DevPod, if you notice one thing about the difference between how HomeTeam used to be explained versus how DevPod's explained today, is it is much more affordable, so we can get more people onboarded. It's much more scalable, so we can have more people in the community making more games, more teammates, and nobody's paying for benefits that they're not using, right? In the redesign, we simplified, we streamlined. We literally did a survey, plus I've got my own data from the business back end, figuring out what were the services that people were not really using, that weren't why they stuck around, and we removed them. Because why pay for stuff you're not using? And that's going to enable us over in the DevPod side, and already is starting to, getting more people on board. Because the other thing that happened again, so I kept making, HomeTeam kept overgrowing into all these different features and components and complexity, and there was a reason for each piece when I added it, but it accumulated to a level of confusion where what would happen was even people who'd known me for years, like good friends of mine, people who I've seen for just often networking events or industry stuff or even hangouts or whatever, someone would describe basically what they needed was HomeTeam at the time in terms of the core piece of it, but their mental model of HomeTeam, my friends, was so complicated they would recommend something else or say they don't know where that is. They don't know what that would be like. And it was so frustrating and difficult for me to be like, but it's literally the core piece of what we did. And what we did for DevOps, we took that core piece, isolated it, and moved it aside and said, here is just the part where we're bringing you teammates. We're providing minimal structure for a pattern and a framework for how to simplify people able to collaborate, chip in on projects together, make sure they're properly credited, make sure the games come out on time, easy to kind of wade into or wade out of, pick your own path through, keeping all the great things about that core part, while again, making less complicated all the other stuff that just made it hard to say, like, but is it the right fit for these other situations? So we've simplified it. That's what DevPods GG is all about. It's part of getting more people into the process, into the same benefits of it. And part of what's great is by lowering that cost, in addition to making it easier to just have more people, it's going to be a greater variety of people, right? So for example, HomeTeam included some of my programming resources that we don't include in DevPods. But part of what happens, we realize is people join whose specializations is art, is audio, who of course are essential, valuable parts of the community, or writers, or level designers, valuable parts of those teams. They didn't want to feel like they're paying for programming materials, programming courses that they didn't want to take. DevPod strips that away and focuses on just the part that's great. This even actually reminds me of, so there was somebody who, she was on her, I can't recall if she was on her podcast or was talking at networking events, but she'd emphasize that like there was a course that she would take in grad school that was like her favorite experience there, which was basically instead of lectures, instead of all the other stuff being thrown at them or assignments, it was basically put people on teams, tell them to make a project by the end of the semester, give some weekly updates, and that was the course. That was her favorite experience in game grad school. And sure enough, that was consistent with my experience at Georgia Tech. That was my experience when I was teaching at Northeastern. I ran a whole class that way to kind of figure out how to adapt our model to what's happening over there. And it was a case where we realized that, yeah, actually stripping away all this other stuff, people didn't actually want the lectures. People didn't actually want the hands-on stuff. They don't need that at the same level they used to. And where we best serve in terms of the DevPods thing, which has always been true for HomeTeam, but now even clearer in the simplified case for DevPods, is that we know that there's a whole lot of folks out there who maybe they've hit the limit of what they can do solo. Maybe this is how you felt, right? You've been doing it, you've been making progress, you were making some stuff, you maybe made some jams, maybe some small projects, kind of at the limit of what you could do alone. But those same people, yourself included perhaps, don't need a ton of hand-holding, don't need to be given assignments, don't need to be told what to do, don't need to be taking lectures, right? There's somewhere in the middle of just need a little bit of teammates to reach out to, of just need some peers to connect with. That's where we're helping, Tim and I, to do our best to bring in together, get on the same page, on board, make sure people are kind of through a level of some content moderation to make sure people are kind of polite with each other, some basic structure and process to get people on the same page about how we're conducting things, to lower the pressures, to make it accessible and friendly to beginners. That's what we're doing with DevPods, taking that piece minus all the other cost overhead. Fundamentally, when I started my business, so HomeTeam now, again, October 2015, that was iterations of previous college clubs I'd run. But when we went online, it was partly modeled by one of my inspirations in life, MTJ, lead designer for Bubble Bobble, game my brother and I played when I was a child. And MTJ actually went on to found one of the first kind of like online remote schools, and it's older. It might have been 2007 or so I think it was partly email, but directly on his page he explained that part of what happened was because they could focus on this smarter way of doing business, they didn't have to spend nearly as much because you weren't paying for a whole campus, you weren't paying for buildings, you weren't paying for parking, you weren't paying for driving, without compromising the quality of the learning, without compromising the quality of the experience people involved. And the same thing here, fundamentally, even though it's really about bringing teammates together to make games that they want to make, there's a lot of learning going on, a lot of process, but it's much more self-driven. It's much more adapted to the strength of the fact that we know you can ask the internet, you can browse resources. There's great resources already on YouTube, but the whole ecosystem has changed fundamentally, where we were able to deliver on the actual part you need is you just need folks who are in the same cohort going the same direction more than anything else. That I thought I was helping by adding all the materials and industry interviews and support trainers and stuff. And for a certain small cohort of people who are really industry move the needle for them. For others, they felt like, why am I paying for the benefits that I wouldn't use? Right? It's like if I joined a gym and it included a spin class and it included yoga, and I don't want to do a spin class or yoga, then I'm like, why am I paying for those? So we say, no, we're just going to set it up as a gym, right? Except instead of equipment, it is current other game development projects. It is other developers who are there ready to have kind of pick up games, essentially, building the games you want to build, taking exactly the same formula we've used for HomeTeam for 10 years to make over 220 games, but further streamlined, further simplified. I took stuff that used to have to require a meeting with me personally to instead cook that into a video about what goes into pitching and leading a project, so you can do the whole thing. You can kick off a project and release a project, do all the updates without ever having to schedule a call with me or anybody else. It enables work for more people, including especially you. So check it out at devpods.gg. Hope you're excited to join us. That's really fundamentally the shift and the change there. A couple of small changes came with it, right? So we used to use JavaScript as one of our options in HomeTeam. We found that folks felt like when I interviewed members, surveyed members, 4 different engines was splitting us too many different directions. So now we focus on Godot, Unreal, and Unity. That's where most of the new people are looking to go. And I try to emphasize in a lot of different places, right? There's nothing wrong with other engines. Other engines are great. It is purely a matter of increasing the chance of overlap so we can have more cross-pollination. And some people like to bounce around a little bit of learning a few different things because maybe conceptually it helps to get some Godot experience, take that mental model back to Unreal or from Unreal into Unity or vice versa. But if you have 7, and we used to see this at all kinds of meetups when I was back in LA helping to organize that stuff. If you've got 12 games in the room and they're each being built totally different, one's in GameMaker, one's in Python, one's in Construct, one's in C++, one's in Unreal. And again, there's nothing wrong with any of those, but it's much harder for those developers to be involved in each other's projects directly. And that is where fundamentally at the core, at the heart of what we're doing in HomeTeam, the strong networking, the strong experience comes from how easy it is for people to bounce around between projects. To go straight from, well, I've already been on some Unity, Unreal, and Godot projects, at least maybe 2 of the 3, or I'm willing to expand into 1 or 2 of the 3. When they see other games come up, a better chance they can have a hit rate versus if another game pitches in, it's something you've never even heard of before, you're just going to get tired of starting over. You can't build that depth of experience, that building on things you've done before, reusing and adapting code you've used before for other projects. That is part of why we narrowed down which instance. But anyway, that's why we went from 4 to 3 and streamlined, simplified, superior, better. Less is better in this case because it's one less thing confusing folks about how to get on board, how to streamline. Here are the places you're going to find teammates here and what they're using. Anyway, join us today in DevPods GG. You can be, actually, if you catch this video soonish, because we're still only 1 dev pod at the time of this video, you can actually go immediately through our registration stuff. No application process. We might even be able to auto sort you into a dev pod. Hop in there, go make games with us, and DevPods GG.